A nuestros lectores y lectoras les cuento que hoy hablaremos con David Poissant, escritor estadounidense que hizo su debut literario en 2014 con el libro de cuentos El cielo de los animales. Esta obra produjo una conmoción en el mundo de la literatura. La crítica lo asoció con nombres tales como Alice Munro, Chekhov y Garber. Hay que decir que tardó 10 años en escribir estos cuentos y esto habla muy bien de él, de su trabajo meticuloso, artesanal y exigente. 7 años después, en 2021, publicó La vida en el lago, su primera novela, continuidad de la vida de los personajes de uno de los cuentos del cielo de los animales. Pese a que es muy joven, ha ganado numerosos y prestigiosos premios, el Matt Clark, George Garrett Fiction, el Rob Walk Fiction Chapbook, el GLCA New Writers y el Alice White Reeves Memorial. También ganó el premio de Amazon, una señal de que gustó a la crítica y también a los lectores masivos. Poissant fue profesor de literatura y actualmente da clases de escritura creativa en la Universidad de Florida. It's a pleasure to talk with you, analyze your work and share your books with the readers from Spain and Latin America. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I appreciate you taking the time to read my work and engage with it.
First question. El cielo de los animales es el título de un poema precioso de James J.K. Empezaría con esta pregunta: ¿cuál es tu relación con la poesía? Ya que en tu prosa hay muchos elementos poéticos como las imágenes y el ritmo. Quisiera saber si eres un escritor que trabaja más allá del fondo, la forma del texto, y si esto te interesa especialmente.
Oh, sure. That's a beautiful question. Thank you. I see myself at times not even as much of a fiction writer as a failed poet, which is to say that when I was much younger, all I wanted to do was be a poet. And I found that my love of language and my love of image translated well to poetry, but my drive for narrative helped me to realize that a lot of times when I was writing poems, I was really just writing fiction with line breaks. I had found myself wanting to be a poet, but I was really telling stories. And so when I gave myself permission to write fiction, it really opened up a whole world to me that I found I could still write stories that were interested in language at the sentence level, that were interested in the rhythms, and the imagery that we find in poetry, the figurative language of simile and metaphor, but that I could still do it in story form. And instead of writing these incredibly long poems, I could turn them into short stories. For me, the illusion of the James Dickey poem is, on the one hand, he was a Southern writer, and I'm obsessed with the Southeastern United States, having grown up in Georgia and live now in Florida. And so I wanted to kind of pay homage, respect to one of the great Southern writers. For me, the greats including James Dickey and Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, but also just to just to engage with that poem, which isn't just about animals like the collection is, but also is interested in this idea of faith and afterlife, this question of what comes next, which is something that I think will always preoccupy all of my fiction. Something I explored more in Lake Life than in Heaven of Animals, but this question of God, and is there a higher power, and if so, what might an afterlife look like?
Este tema aparece también en La vida del lago, en la novela, con el niño, ¿no? Esta continuidad de la vida de los inocentes después de la muerte.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a story I first wrote the story in 2005, and I at the time I did not have children. My wife and I were contemplating pregnancy, and there was this great fear, I think, about bringing a child into the world and what that would look like, and kind of what your responsibilities become as a human once you have another human to take care of. The greatest fear, of course, would be that you could lose that child, and not through any fault of your own, but just through sort of chance or the chaos of the universe or God. And so, as I often do in my fiction, I just decided to write toward my fear, to write toward the darkest thing that could happen, and say, all right, instead of writing a story where a child dies at the end, what if you write a story that begins with the worst thing that could happen happening, and then try to kind of explore the fallout from that and see what happens next. And then I thought I was done with those characters, but I revisited them for Lake Life, and again a child dies in the beginning, and it becomes this question of where do you go from that? Once the worst thing has happened, how do you rebuild your life from the ashes?
Hay una conexión entre los animales y los inocentes. ¿Hay una conexión también entre los animales y el resto de tus personajes? No digo que sean inocentes, pero quizás sean tan vulnerables como los niños y como los animales.
Yeah.
It's difficult to explain.
Yeah. Wow, that's a good. I've never been asked that before. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been thinking about this philosophically for a while. There are times when I feel like, people are mostly good and the world is cruel. And there are other times when I feel like the world is mostly good and people are cruel. And I can't make up my mind on that. I land in different places depending on what I've had for breakfast. And I think that it's okay to live in that tension and to write stories that reflect both of those. So this question of innocence, are animals even innocent? I don't know. Animals, to me, maybe other than domesticated animals, I question whether, animals are even capable of good or bad. I mean, they're going to do what they need to do to survive. So that's what I love about the James Dickey poem, where, you think of the predator as evil and the prey is innocent. But then, of course, if the predator doesn't eat, the predator dies. So is it the job then of the prey to be eaten? Is that what they take their pleasure in? I don't know. It's complicated. And I kind of like stories and poems that end in a point where the question is there, but there are no good answers for, I think what I know to be true is that there are people in the world who want to do good and still wind up hurting themselves and hurting others. Those are the characters that I'm most interested in exploring in fiction. I see people in real life and in fiction who hurt each other, don't mean to, and are trying to atone. I feel like in some way, every story in The Heaven of Animals is about a character who is trying to tell someone, I love you, or I'm sorry, and they can't figure out how to do it, or they're doing it in a very clumsy human way. And so I just try to stay there with them and live in that difficulty and see what it feels like to be clumsy and human, because I think we all are clumsy humans.
Quizá debía ser la salvedad de animales no depredadores.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess so. But then, I think every animal can become a predator, right? Like even seemingly, and this is disturbing, but when I was a kid, I had a lot of different pets. I was the weird kid in the neighborhood who had all these animals whose parents tolerated this. And I even kept mice at one point, and these lovely little mice who are prey to so many other animals who are herbivores and seem innocent. Sometimes they just kill each other, and sometimes the mothers eat their young for no good reason. So it's hard to see a little innocent mother mouse as innocent after you watch her eat her babies.
Complejos como los humanos, ¿no?
Yeah. Yes.
Otra característica de tu prosa es que los personajes son muy vívidos. Uno los recuerda como si los hubiera visto estos personajes. Parecen más personas que personajes. ¿Te encariñas también tú con ellos? ¿Cómo vives este proceso de convivencia con el personaje?
Oh, thank you. Well, that's the best compliment I could get. So thank you first for saying that. I mean, I absolutely live with these people. Yeah, they haunt me. I hear their voices. I'm taking dictation from them and trying to keep up with them. And when I look back at a book like Lake Life and I think about the characters and wonder where they are now, sometimes I feel like they're old friends that I want to call on the phone and see how they're doing. And other times I'm afraid of them because, especially with a character like, say, Michael, who's an alcoholic, who's a misogynist, who's, angry at everything in the world, and mostly because he's most angry at himself and doesn't know where to direct that anger, so he directs it at everyone around him. Spending time in a head like that is draining, and you can only spend so much time there before you have to turn and write from the point of view of another character. Otherwise, you can get stuck in that mindset. I feel like when I'm writing at my best, I think it must feel like what an actor feels when they're method acting. I don't know if you're as familiar with that term there, but method acting, this idea of inhabiting a character till you feel like you become them. You're drawing on your own feelings to find a place to ground yourself in them, and you kind of become that character in a scene or on the stage. And if I'm writing well, I feel like I'm in that character's headspace, that I'm capable of feeling anything they would feel or doing anything they might do, which is a scary place to put yourself when they're a cruel or deeply angry person. But yeah, I still, even in writing the worst characters, I try my best to find the humanity in them. And so if they feel human to you, then that's a great compliment to me, because that's what I want more than anything, is for them to just feel realistic, to feel like people, not like caricatures, not like cartoons.
Sí, sí, son reales. David, tú tardaste 10 años en escribir El cielo de los animales. ¿Cómo fue el camino desde la escritura hasta la publicación? ¿Empezaste a escribir, escribiste todos los cuentos juntos y después lo fuiste corrigiendo, lo fuiste escribiendo de a poco? ¿Cómo fue este camino?
Yeah, thank you. So the only thing that sounds misleading about saying the book took me 10 years is it makes it sound as though I only worked on these specific stories for that amount of time. The reality is that in that amount of time, I wrote closer to 40 or 45 stories, many of which I published in small magazines. But once I had found an editor for the book with Simon & Schuster, and we started to look through all the stories we had, she and I had almost identical opinions of which were the strongest stories, which were the best ones, which ones work together thematically with this idea of animals and humanity and questions of faith and meaning. So yeah, the ones that we chose, they were pretty well spread out. I think the earliest story in that collection is How to Help Your Husband Die. That one I know I wrote in 2004. And then some of the longer ones tend to be the latest ones. So Nudists and Amputee and the title story, Heaven of Animals, those really long ones, those were ones that I was writing in like 2011, 12, 13. As I was getting more into novel mode, I think the stories stretched, and I was giving myself permission to take more time, use a bigger canvas, spend more time with the characters. So those stories were written over 10 years, but they weren't the only things I wrote, and they were definitely spaced out. And I wish that I were the kind of artist where every single time I sat down to write a story, it would be as good as the stories in this book. But for whatever reason, sometimes they don't always hit that mark. And so I just hope to collect the best of the best at the end of the day.
Pero tú, cuando escribías un cuento, ¿lo cerrabas o a lo mejor volvías 5 años después a revisarlo y a corregirlo? Esa es la pregunta.
Yeah, usually I will write a first draft very quickly, and then I will put it away for a few months, and then I will revise it, and then usually give it like a couple of revisions, line edits over the course of a month or two. So yeah, I would say all in all, it probably takes me 6 months to write a story, where I'll write a first draft in a few days, then try to put it away for months, so that when I come back to it, it feels like someone else wrote it, and I can be more objective in tearing it apart. I don't feel so close to it. So yeah, from beginning to end, about 6 months probably.
Los cuentos que sobraron de esta selección, ¿has pensado hacer otro libro, publicar un segundo libro con estos cuentos que no se publicaron en el Cielo de los Animales? Con los que descartaron, digamos.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the interest. Some of them, yes. So I did recently just finish a new collection. It's tentatively titled Sons and Daughters. It's 16 stories. They're all about parenthood. There's 8 stories of the parents of daughters and 8 stories of the parents of sons. And very much informed by the fact that I now have twin 13-year-old girls. So I've spent the last 13 years embroiled in parenthood. And so, yeah, I would say, I think 4 or 5 of those stories were from the pile of the aforementioned 40 or 45 that just didn't that I loved but didn't quite fit the themes of Heaven of Animals. Those have been moved to this, and then the other 10 or 12 are ones that I've written over the last 6 or 7 years, while I was also working on the novel. Because working on the novel, I would often have to take breaks, and I would write a short story, and then I'd come back to the novel, and then I'd write a short story. So I have this new collection. It's with my agent, and I'm working on a new novel now as well. So our hope is in the next year here to try to sell both books together and publish those.
¿Tu metodología de trabajo con los cuentos y con la novela fue diferente?
Yeah, different. Yes. The novel was, I feel like for the novel, at first I did everything wrong. I thought that by knowing how to write short stories, I thought
Why?
Well, I thought because I'd kind of felt like I'd figured out the structure of short stories. I'd figured out the form. I knew what I was doing. And so I falsely assumed that writing a novel would be just like writing a long story. When that proved not to be true, I thought that I could think of the individual chapters of the novel as stories. And so I tried not to think of it as a novel, but as like 40 short stories in a row. That doesn't really work because chapters don't always have perfect beginning, middles, and ends and narrative arcs within a novel. They also have to be part of this much larger arc. And then with a novel, you have, a number of through lines. In this case, I had 6 viewpoint characters, the parents, the 2 sons, their partners. And so trying to keep track of all of the characters, their relationships with one another, their work situations, their anxieties, their tensions, it was too much to hold in my head. I had gotten to the point where, I was never a writer who took notes. I was never a writer who used outlines. I was always a writer who could hold all the story in my head. As long as the story never got past 30 or 40 pages, I could remember things. I could keep it in my head. Even at the sentence level, I could remember, if I used the word cerulean on page 12, I would never use it again in the story. But with a novel, once you hit, page 100, you can't even remember certain character traits, things they've done, pieces of their history, let alone what word they used on page 12. So that inability to remember so much and juggle all those things forced me to start, making huge notebooks full of character descriptions, timelines, histories, a list of all the different tensions throughout the novel, making sure that I resolve them. Also just figuring out the math of the novel, wanting the characters to get somewhat similar amounts of screen time, page space, making sure that one character hadn't spent, too much time away from the page, till it finally just got to the point where, I would have to be looking at a scene and think, all right, here's a scene that 3 characters are in the scene. It could be from, the father's viewpoint. It could be from Diane's viewpoint. It could be from Michael's viewpoint. Who's the best character to tell this scene from? Because depending on whose head we're in, the scene is going to feel very different. And so those questions of point of view were rarely something that I had to work at in short stories. I think there's only one short story in my first collection that juggles 2 points of view. The rest, they're just in one character's head. And so making those point of view choices of, okay, chronologically, I know this has to happen next to the novel, but who gets to tell this part of the story? And that was also often a sort of trial and error predicament, because I might write the chapter from one character's point of view and realize, what this chapter has to say, what the book feels interested in here would be way more interesting if Diane told this story instead of Richard or whatever the case would be. So really thinking about who gets to tell this part of the story and why became a much bigger part of the writing process than it had been for the short stories.
Al principio hablabas de los miedos. Y quisiera saber cómo aparecen estos miedos transfigurados en tu obra. Por ejemplo, Woody Allen, en sus películas, los personajes nunca mencionan las enfermedades, ¿no? No las mencionan nunca, hablan con eufemismos, no las mencionan. En cambio, tú, David, pones las enfermedades, hablas de enfermedades. Y quisiera saber si haces un conjuro diferente al de Woody Allen, ¿no? Y qué relación hay con los miedos en general, enfermedad, muerte.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I've never been asked a question before that invoked Woody Allen. It's such an interesting comparison. and I'm glad that you see my work as kind of the opposite of his, because for whatever reason, his work his work has never resonated with me as a viewer. There's something about that very arch, wry, cold, intellectual New York kind of tone that does not resonate with like the way I was brought up in this very overly earnest, religious South. That I think if my work has a corollary, I've seen it compared a lot to the work of Flannery O'Connor, and I definitely get that, because I do tend to come at things directly with less subtlety, and I'm okay with that. I think that I definitely wear my heart on my sleeve a little, and I'm less interested in characters who are trying to be clever and trying to not quite face things head on. Does that answer your question?
Tiene que ver más que nada con las neurosis de los autores, con los miedos de los autores, con las neurosis. Woody Allen, en sus películas, nunca menciona enfermedades. Trata de evitar las palabras, ¿no? Trata de no mencionar las enfermedades, porque si las menciona, suceden. En cambio, David menciona las enfermedades. Es como si esto fuera, como si las mencionara, no suceden.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I
como si fuera una forma de espantar los temores, decirlos, ¿no? Decirle el miedo espanta el miedo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel superstitious. I don't think there's any good reason to pretend to hide, to not name the thing, because the worst thing is probably going to happen. It's like the saying. I love the saying. Anxious people are right, because the things they're anxious about could happen, and there are things that are unlikely to happen. If you're afraid to fly, you're probably never going to die in an airplane crash, but then a certain number of airplanes do crash every year, and so it could happen. So why not name the thing, face the fear? You're no more likely to make it happen by invoking it. And there's also kind of this school of literature, this question of how much we want to pathologize our characters, how much we want to kind of spend time with them on the couch. And particularly for Lake Life, I decided not to be afraid of that. I decided to name it. I was really interested in Thad's depression, and in Thad kind of diagnosing his father and his brother Michael as depressives who are just medicating with alcohol and other things, because why not? I mean, we live in a time when we have science, and when we are many of us are in therapy, and we're interested in talking about these things. And so I don't know, being afraid to diagnose our characters or let them somehow remain mysterious, that seems at times like a mistake to me. I see characters as in this day and age as more self-aware than that, and so why not follow them to their doctor's appointments, look at the labels on their medication bottles, and be honest about that they know what they're going through.
Great, thanks. Bueno, la obra fue traducida a varios idiomas. ¿Cuál fue la recepción en los diversos países? Si tuvo más impacto en algunos países que en otros, me gustaría saber. En Argentina, por ejemplo, te aman, me consta.
But yeah, the reception has been overwhelming. It's been beautiful. For whatever reason, I found that the French readers and the Spanish readers and the Italian readers have been by far the most enthusiastic. I feel as though in translation in those three languages, the work has been even better received than in the United States, which is flattering and very fun for me. But yeah, it seems like nowhere more so than in Uruguay and Argentina. I feel like
como Woody Allen también, ¿no? Que las películas tienen más éxito en otros países que... Ahí está el punto de conexión con Woody Allen.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry.
No, that's fun. But yeah, I've felt so much love from the Argentinian readers and yeah, from Latin American readers. It's been beautiful. I don't know what to attribute that to, other than the fact that the translations are obviously gorgeous. I have to give the credit to the translators and their ability to put my words in the language that would speak to their readers.
La traducción fue excelente. No sé si estás en contacto con las traductoras y si participas en este proceso tú, o no tienes nada que ver con eso.
A little bit, yeah. Mostly with Barbara Bellick. We had a number of back and forth emails, mostly whenever there was any question of wanting to get language precise. I remember I believe this was with her. It might have been with a French translator or the Italian. But I think I believe it was with all three. One of the phrases that came up, there's a story in the collection called The Last of the Great Land Mammals, and it is about a pair of cousins who are having this affair. And so in America, particularly in the South, there's this term for this called kissing cousins, this idea of people who are related by blood but are also having this sexual relationship. And it turns out in most languages there was not this corollary. There was no good term for kissing cousins. And so I remember multiple times having to explain to multiple translators what this was, and then them trying to come up with, and I don't remember what Barbara finally came up with for the Spanish, but them trying to come up with some sort of catchphrase or expression that would show that in English this was actually like an expression that was commonly used. That one was fun, but there were a number of little things like that, and I love that about corresponding with translators, is when you can tell they want to get the book word perfect. They want to make sure that while it reads well rhythmically in their language, it also stays true to the voice and the perceptions of the characters on the page.
Ok, thanks. Bueno, por último, me gustaría conocer tus gustos literarios. ¿Cuáles son tus escritores favoritos, aquellos que lees y que relees con gusto?
Oh wow. There's so many.
O tres, por lo menos tres, aunque sean los tres más importantes. Los que relees, ¿no? Los que vuelves siempre a ellos.
You were kind enough to mention him in my introduction, but Raymond Carver. Carver has always been a huge influence to me. He studied under Gordon Lish. A number of my favorite writers in America studied under Gordon Lish. Writers like Amy Hempel, Mary Robeson, Sam Legon. Lish is this famously difficult person, but he was very good at helping writers to pare down their stories, often cutting as much as 50 or 60% of the story to find the real story being told at the heart of the story. And to represent that story in very precise, very economical language without wasting time on the page. I think later Carver, once he got away from some of the economy of that and let himself breathe a little, especially in stories like Cathedral or in that Chekhov story, The Errand, I think those stories got even better because he found his own way to kind of tell a longer story while still obeying sort of Lish's care at the sentence level. But even beyond just the technical prowess of Carver, I feel like his work gets more and more important as we see kind of the touchstones of how it contributes to the culture. So I'm thinking about a movie like Robert Altman's Shortcuts, or more recently Birdman. I don't know if you saw Birdman with Michael Keaton, which is essentially like a story about a playwright trying to write a play about the Carver story, what we talk about when we talk about love. And so, it's the kind of movie where if you haven't read the Carver story, it still works. But if you know the Carver story, it takes on so many more levels of depth. And that was very exciting to me when, to see that movie, to see it do so well here in the US and win so many awards, because I think it opens that door for Carver's work to continue to kind of sort of stay in, I don't know if this zeitgeist is probably too strong a word, but to kind of stay in the literary imagination and kind of continue to influence writers and artists. So yeah, Carver's work will always be really important to me. When it comes to novels, I feel like there are a few novels that I return to again and again, as much as I do to Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I don't know if that's been translated into Spanish. Do you know that one?
Sí, claro.
Yeah, it's just this, it's the complete opposite of Carver. It's this behemoth puzzle novel, over 1,000 pages, tons of footnotes, very small print. But I've read it a few times now, and every time I read it, I discover new things. There are so many characters, so many plot lines. It's the kind of book I would aspire to write if I thought I could write it, but I don't think I'll ever get to that point. It's just so huge and unwieldy, but incredibly well done and really difficult. So when I want to really challenge myself, that's the novel that I return to again and again. And then more recently, let's see, I would say the last best book I read would be probably either of the two books of Danielle Evans. She's one of my favorite American writers.
Mm-hmm.
Her first collection was called Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self. And let me see, her second collection, what was it called here? Oh, yeah, The Office of Historical Corrections, which is the title novella in there is, I don't want to give too much away, but it takes place in this sort of slightly altered future where there is a sort of a unit of the American government that is tasked with going around and correcting things that are in print or in public spaces that misrepresent history, specifically Black history. And the way that she deals with questions of race and culture in that book are absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, I honestly think, it's one of the most important story collections that's been written in this century. I was really shocked when it didn't win the Pulitzer Prize. And then it was nominated for the Story Prize, and I was really shocked when it didn't win that, but I was glad to see it at least be a finalist. So I think, yeah, everyone should read Danielle Evans' Office of Historical Corrections. It's just one of those books that it's what it has to say is incredibly important, but also the writing is just gorgeous and beautiful stories.
Virginia Woolf, por
Oh,
ejemplo, sé que te gusta.
yes, I love Woolf. Absolutely. Yeah, I actually just went through a Russian phase this year where I was so underread on the Russians that I decided to read a bunch of Chekhov, Tolstoy, Gogol, Turgenev, and I was guided there by the writer George Saunders. He has written this sort of writing book in the US that's gotten pretty popular, in which he's re-examining all these Russian masters. And so that was really fun. I was definitely underread in that area. And and I can now see the influences that Chekhov had on Carver. Those were really enjoyable reads. I like Borges quite a bit. I like Calvino an awful lot. I recently just reread If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino, and that is just such a wild, beautiful, weird novel. Have you read that novel?
Oh, es
No,
buenísima.
I love that novel because it's basically about a novel in search
De
of a novel.
Calvino, de Calvino. Sí, sí, de Calvino. Sí, sí, sí. Genial,
Yes.
claro, claro.
Yeah.
Sí, sí, sí.
Yeah, it's a kind of novel where every chapter starts a new novel. It's this man who's trying desperately to read a novel, but then he gets to chapter 2 and it's missing. He goes to the bookstore and they give him what's supposed to be the book, and then he starts another chapter. And through a series of misadventures, he basically never is able to finish a novel. So you kind of have what turns out to be 10 or 12 first chapters. And yet by the end, there is a connective tissue that tells a whole story that you weren't expecting to get, especially through the titles of the chapters that kind of form its own little poem at the end. It's always surprising to me. It's always delightful. That's definitely my favorite of Calvino's books.
Bueno, hay un cuento tuyo, que es uno de mis favoritos, que yo le encontré realismo mágico latinoamericano y existencialismo francés, que es El bebé que brilla. Me gustaría grabar ese cuento, si me autorizas, para compartirlo en la audioteca. Y bueno, y preguntarte también si tú tienes un cuento favorito del Cielo de los Animales. Para mí, este es uno de mis favoritos.
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, yeah, you can absolutely record it. That would be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, favorite is hard. I think if I had to choose a favorite, I would probably pick 100% Cotton. The story in which the young man is trying to end his life by having someone else shoot him, and kind of an echo of his own father's death.
Oh, es la otra favorita mía.
Yeah, I feel like that story gets at all the themes I'm interested in my other stories, but in sort of the most succinct 4-page package. Yeah, these questions of love, of parenthood, of grief, of atonement, of recreating the mistakes of our parents, of questioning existentially, what life is all about, and also with also like a weird, like sort of almost screwball comic element, like a kind of a magical scenario. Like it could happen, but would it happen? Like who would really try to do this? Yeah, that story for me, it's doing all, it's playing all the games I like to play in my other stories.
Vamos cerrando con 5 preguntas del cuestionario de Proust, el famoso cuestionario Proust. ¿Lo conocías?
I don't.
Ok, es un cuestionario que le hicieron a Proust y después se lo han ido haciendo a lo largo de la historia a muchos escritores. ¿Cuál es el rasgo principal de tu personalidad? Which is the main characteristic of your personality?
I would say hope. I would say I hope that I'm hopeful. I try to be hopeful.
Qué bueno. Where would you like to live?
Oh, the Florida Keys, for sure. I already live in Florida. I'm very close. I'm about a 5-6 hour drive, but at least 3 times a year now, I drive and spend a week down in the Florida Keys. I really like the Middle Keys, Grassy Key, Duck Key, Marathon, Bahia Honda, snorkeling, the fishing, the beauty of nature there. It's quiet and wonderful, and it's a great place to think. And just, yeah, I definitely feel alive when I visit the Keys.
Your idea of happiness?
Oh, happiness. I think just being with my family, with my wife and daughters. Yeah, spending time with the people that I trust and love the most.
Lo que más valoras de tus amigos.
Friends. Oh, honesty. Yeah, sincerity, earnestness, humor. Yeah, I think that blend of humor, but also being able to be vulnerable and honest.
Bueno, y la última, una licencia que me tomo, una pregunta que añado yo. Sin animales, ¿la tierra es más infierno que cielo?
Yes. Yes. Yes, we have to have animals. I think so. I think they, despite their lack of innocence, I think they show us other ways to love one another.
Muchísimas gracias. Y esto a título personal, quiero decírtelo, me gusta mucho conocer escritores nuevos, a diario busco literatura nueva y por lo general encuentro los libros y en los primeros párrafos digo, no me interesa, me aburre, no, no. Contigo lo que me pasó fue que me quedé asombradísima y bueno, y seguí leyendo, ¿no? Y me di cuenta de que eres un gran escritor, de estos escritores que van a perdurar, y escritores que hacen literatura, que es lo que está faltando en este tiempo.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that.
Muchísimas gracias, David, y bueno, y cuando esté tu nuevo libro, estaremos conversando seguramente.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for translating, and thank you both for your time.
My
Thank you for
pleasure.
reading. This was wonderful. So this was easy. Yeah, very painless.
Ok, bueno, estamos en contacto. Muchísimas gracias.
Adios.
Adiós, adiós, gracias.